The Sweet 16 is set, and for just the second time since the field expanded in 1985, it does not include Duke, Kansas, Kentucky, or North Carolina. What?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoops show out there. We've been with you 7 days a week throughout Champ Week and the NCAA Tournament, and we wouldn't be anywhere else. He's Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade. We are your hosts. Coming up today, Gonzaga moves on to their 8th straight Sweet 16. That's ridiculous. We have a 4-pack of Big East games that took place on Sunday, but the big story is the lack of blue bloods remaining in this Sweet 16. And Andy, it's just wild. It never ceases to shock me how jarring it is, how quickly we go from 68 to 64 to 16. And you just realize at this point now, you look at this list that's left and it's like, oh, one of these 16 teams will be our national champion. Like, it's not hypothetical. This is it. This is who's left. Crazy.
Yeah, it happens so fast every year. Every year, it feels like it's a blink of an eye. And certainly this year, watching as many games as humanly possible, like you see them a little bit more so. But man, it is crazy how quickly it goes from 64 to 16. And I'm very excited about this field that we have remaining.
Yeah, it is a fun field. I know we've lost some of the top teams and the top seeds, but there's very many worthy teams remaining. That could, and one of whom will win this thing. And as we get into Sunday's slate, looking at it on paper, I thought it was going to be infinitely better than Saturday's. There was a lot more matchups I was excited about, but it just quite didn't live up in terms of like competitive games or excitement. There were a couple though, and we are certainly going to get into it. Let's start, Andy, with Kansas State knocking off Kentucky 75 to 69. We'll talk about Kansas State here in just a second because, wow, man. Mm-hmm. But, Andy, for Kentucky, they haven't made the second weekend now since the 2018-19 season. They haven't made a Final Four since 2014-15. And as we all know, they still just have that one national championship under John Calipari. And for the bigger blue blood look really quick, as I said, this is just the second time since the field expanded to 64 teams in 1985 that none of the foursome of Duke, Kansas, Kentucky, or North Carolina made the Sweet 16. Here's the weird thing, though. That other time was just 2 years ago, 2021. Yeah. So that means that this has happened in 2 of the past 3 years. Blue bloods, new bloods, what's going on? What's going on with Kentucky specifically?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a larger conversation to be had that we kind of touched on, I think, in last episode as well, kind of talking about the transfer portal and NIL and some of the ways that is impacting competition levels across the sport. You're not seeing teams just be as dominant as they were in the past. You're not seeing the kind of the juggernauts. You're seeing some fantastic teams. Obviously, we're going to talk about Gonzaga going to 8 straight Sweet 16s, and that's incredible, but they don't have any championships out of that group either. So you're not talking about a dynasty the way that you might be in other ways. And for Kentucky, I know people are going to bag on Calipari here and kind of question whether he's the right guy for the job because we've seen all these early exits. And like, this is different from the previous years for a lot of reasons. And I want to point out a tweet that I thought was misleading, I think is the politest way that I'm going to phrase this tweet from Jeff Goodman, describing John Calipari's last 3 years. And he said, 2021, they did not make the NCAA tournament. 2022, they lost in the first round to St. Peter's. Both of those things objectively true, objectively bad, not really any other way to look at it. And then he said 2023, lost in the second round to a Kansas State team that was picked to finish last in the Big 12. That does not tell you the story accurately about this Kentucky team at all. And I think it's disingenuous to phrase it that way because that makes it sound like they got upset a third year in a row or had some disastrous loss. Could they have won this game? Absolutely. Should they have? I don't know. I think you can make an argument that, yes, they should have won the game just from watching it. They missed some shots down the stretch. Antonio Reeves had a really off night, but they were a 6 seed and Kansas State was a 3 seed. I don't care what they were picked before the season. I don't care that they were picked to finish last in the Big 12. Marquette was picked to finish 9th in the Big East, and they got a 2 seed. Kansas State got a 3 seed. This is a darn good Wildcats team, Kansas State, I should say, and they earned it. And I think, I think Kentucky fans have every right to be frustrated about not advancing to the Sweet 16 for a third year in a row, and I understand that. But I don't. This loss should be framed significantly differently than their previous 2 years. And unfortunately, it's not getting that way. And I think it takes away from the incredible season that Jerome Tang and Marcus Noel and Keyonte Johnson have had for Kansas State.
It absolutely does. I mean, because what you just said that Jeff said is true. Mm-hmm. Kansas State was picked dead last, but it would be like me adding on to what you just said and saying, and Andy, Kentucky also didn't make the Sweet 16 in 2020. So what's going on there, right? Like it's a very similar thing, because what I just said to you is factually accurate. They did not make the Sweet 16 in 2020.
Right.
But we didn't have a turn, and it's the same.
We didn't have a Sweet 16.
So like, come on, man, let's not bag on K-State, because let's move into that. One of the best storylines of this entire season. And it's been fun. I feel like we've been writing this storyline a lot this season because we've just enjoyed what Jerome Tang and these guys have done. As Jeff said, truthfully, picked dead last, 10th in the Big 12 preseason. And now on to the Sweet 16, had a great year in the toughest conference in all of Division I. Just golf clap for the Kansas State Wildcats for what they did. Andy, let's turn our attention just for a minute or two here to the game itself, because man, Oscar Tshiebwe went bonkers in this game. We've been looking for him to get back to doing that. 25 and 18 on 8 of 13 shooting. Cason Wallace had, just one of the best two-way players in the entire nation. A phenomenal defender, pours in 21 points on 9 of 11 shooting, 9 rebounds, 4 assists. Although he did have 5 turnovers. So did Oscar Tshiebwe. We'll just conveniently skate by that a little bit. But really great game for both those guys. But unfortunately, there wasn't much help to be found elsewhere in terms of putting the ball in the basket. Meanwhile, Kansas State, you mentioned Marquise Noel's name. Just talk about this diminutive point guard and what a baller he is.
27 points in this one. He had 9 assists, 7 of 14 shooting. Just phenomenal all-around performance from him. He's small in stature. It's obvious when you watch the games that he's one of the smallest guys out there. He looks like one of the smallest Power 5 players out there that's playing regularly. He's not a big guy, but he gets to his spots. He hits big shots. He's an incredible distributor, a facilitator. And through the first 2 games of the NCAA tournament, he's averaging 22 points and 11.5 assists. The only other player to do that into a Sweet 16 was John Crotty in 1989. With Virginia. Like he's putting together an all-time run. And Keyonte Johnson has probably been the player who's gotten a little bit more attention because of the situation at Florida and him collapsing on the floor and the health issues and making a return. And he deserves all of that attention, by the way. An incredible story for him and for that team. But I think this is a really, really fun story. And I think it's kind of an iron sharpens iron situation where being in the Big 12, like you're forced to get better. You're forced to find high level players and adapt and adjust. And Jerome Tang has done that. And they found the right players and they put the pieces together and they built a team that, quite honestly, they have a really, really good chance of continuing this run. And quite honestly, they could compete for a national championship. I really believe that. I'm not sure that they're a front runner, but no. Any team with no disrespect to Princeton, just about any team, I think, has a very realistic, if you're in the Sweet 16, you only got to win a couple more games, and Kansas State is one of the best teams that's remaining. And I think they have a really good chance of making some serious noise and potentially being in a Final Four or even a national championship. Well, Isaac, from a team that was struggling to make the second weekend to a team that has now made it to 8 straight Sweet 16 appearances, we're going to talk about the Gonzaga Bulldogs, their win over TCU. What's next for Drew Timme's squad? But first, today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Built Bar. The Built Bar March Madness bracket is here. We know that you have a favorite bar or puff, and now's your time to make it count. Go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. You know that I'm going to be voting for the churro bar, and if you want to support your favorite team to win, then you'll be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or puff. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you will be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will get a free 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You have got to try Built, the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they are so amazing, and you will not think that they are healthy for you. But what makes them so good? Well, they are high in protein, they're low in sugar, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. So run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. Built Bar, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Isaac, let's talk some Zags. Drew Timme put this team on his back as he does so often. 28 points. He had some colorful language that he used after the game as well. We're recording this just shortly after that game ended. Drew Timme doing things that Drew Timme does. If you guys have not read the fantastic article Matt Norlander of CBS wrote about Drew Timme, one of the things he discussed in that article was that Drew Timme has a tendency to not filter himself or his language. And after this game, he just didn't really care. He said that the goal of the team was to not screw up, is the way that we will say it on the podcast, the Sweet 16 streak. And I understand that sentiment for the Zags. Like, this is not as polished of a roster for Gonzaga as the national championship team with Jalen Suggs, as last year's team with Chet Holmgren and Andrew Nembhard. And comparing, like, when those are the comparison points that you have to use, like, it's important to have like further context of, like, people saying, well, this is the worst Gonzaga team in a couple of years. And it's like, that is objectively true. But part of that is because the last couple of years, Gonzaga has been one of the best teams, if not the best team in the entire country. Like, this year's team didn't meet expectations because they started the season ranked number 2. It's kind of hard to meet those expectations. I think if we were to talk to fans of the number 1 team, they would also agree with that sentiment. But for Gonzaga, TCU put up a really big fight. Not Marquise Noel, Mike Miles, the other guard from the Big 12. He had a phenomenal game here, 24 points for him. But the Zags, it feels like they're inevitable. It feels like they're always going to be here. They're in the Sweet 16. This team's got some issues on the defensive end of the floor they got to work out. We'll see if they can get some secondary creators to help them in a really exciting matchup that they got against UCLA, which is going to take place, by the way, 17 years to the day from that epic Sweet 16 matchup where, unfortunately for Gonzaga fans, they don't like to remember it very much, when UCLA made a incredible comeback. Adam Morrison collapsing onto the floor in tears.
Doing this is what I remember.
Yes, Zags fans will spend the next couple of days reminiscing about Jalen Suggs in 2021, because that's a bit more fun of a memory against UCLA, but setting up a really, really fun matchup between two really, really good West Coast teams.
Well, I mean, listen, Mike Miles, that dude has had a ridiculous year. I honestly didn't think without Eddie Lampkin, TCU had much of a hope in this game. And especially with, like, how on earth are you going to stop Drew Timme? Well, they didn't, but they did enough elsewhere that, I mean, they were up at halftime, and I was like, man, and Gonzaga's going to have to do some stuff here. The lead grew a little bit bigger, but boy, that Gonzaga just showed that resilience. They showed their capability, that they know how to. There's just that winning culture that continues to show up, and I think there's something to that. Like how you talked about, this is the worst Gonzaga team in the last 3 years. I guess that's another one of those Goodman facts you were just referencing.
Exactly. Yeah.
But,
it's a bit misleading.
But it's like it doesn't matter, because comparatively, all you got to do is keep winning games against this year's field. They're not competing against the fields of those years.
Exactly.
And so at this point, you're one of 16 teams left in the nation, only one of whom is going to win 4 more games. Why can't it be Gonzaga? I'm not so convinced that it can't be. I mean, we looked at, it was Julian Strother that carried the load the other day. Tonight it was Drew Timme. Tonight it was Rasheer Bolton. Like, I just want to continue to see what this team can do. Malachi Smith hit a massive 3 off the bench. Hunter Salas had 2 key free throws down the stretch, if I remember correctly. Like, just different people contributing, and it doesn't have to be the starting 5 helping do that for Mark Few's team. And so Great stuff there. It's been a great season for TCU and what they've done. Hats off to them as they ride off into the sunset. And we are down to just 2 Big 12 teams. And so speaking of which, Andy, let's breeze by, I guess I say speaking of which, and it'll make sense why here in a second. Let's breeze by 2 of the other round of 32 games from Sunday where it's unfortunate to me that we're breezing by this game because I thought Indiana-Miami was going to be the most exciting game of Sunday, but Miami takes care of things 85-69. And listen, Trace Jackson-Davis, he showed up, had a massive game. Jalen Hood-Schifino showed up after not really in their first game. But it didn't matter. You know why? Because Isaiah Wong showed back up after having not, because Jordan Miller showed back up after having not in their first game. And I thought what they did was monumentally more impactful for Miami, who just continues to chug along. Norchad Omier seems to be okay, had 26 more minutes, didn't score as much, but my dude had 17 rebounds, and he is 6'7" and out there doing that. And so that inside out combination for Jim Larranaga's team. So we continue to move along here, and we go to FAU, FDU, kind of probably the most overlooked game of the day. And to Fairleigh Dickinson's credit, put up a fight. Which probably not, a lot of people think, all right, you did that against Purdue. You probably emptied your gas tank, and now you're just going to fall flat. And they didn't. They pushed and pushed and pushed, but FAU made the plays they needed to make, including a 10-0 run to kind of take a big lead and like early in the game there. And then just we're really kind of able to push it out. FAU wins 78-70, going on to the Sweet 16. Andy, before we move on to talking about the 4-pack of Big East games, we got some fun statistical things here as we head into, folks, for those of you that know me, I'm a little bit of a geek in the numbers and all that stuff. So I like to mess around with this. And so we're just going to throw a couple things at you here. We'll bounce it back and forth. Andy, what do you say about that? So one of the things I always like to look at is the seed aggregate. So I just have an Excel sheet where I keep the seed aggregate for each year at each round. So basically what we're looking at is you take all the teams remaining, add up their seed numbers, and see how low or high it is, because it just indicates that there's been a ton of upsets or not as many. So this year's Sweet 16 aggregate is 78. That's tied for the 12th highest since the field expanded to 64 in 1985. So that's 37 tournaments in that span. The lowest Sweet 16 seed aggregate's 49. That's insanely low. That happened both in 2019 and 2009. And the highest we've ever had is 94, which was in 2021, just 2 years ago. The average is 71.6. As I said, this year,
Peters.
yes, right? Like that certainly helped that quite a bit. The average is 71.6, but here we are this year at 78. And Andy, I hate to say you're wrong, but you're wrong. St. Peter's was 2022.
You're right. Yes, you're absolutely right.
That sucker.
Yeah, I failed.
You did. You know what? But it's been a weekend, my friend, and both our brains are scrambled. And so anyway, so aggregate of 78 this year, 12th highest, not really going to either bookend, but just always interesting to look at. Another thing, Andy, is that when we look at the bracket in its totality, you see all the possibilities of teams that can make it. But when we get to the Sweet 16, it's like, oh, there's only 4 teams in each region now. And one of these 4 teams is going to be in the Final Four. And I know there's always like weird examples of like, one of these teams is going and that's going to be weird. So like, could you give us like an example of that from this season?
The South region is going to be fun, man. We got 4 teams that are left, and the 4 teams, only one of them has ever been to the Final Four, and that's Princeton. They're the only one, and they went in 1965. So, like, yes, it wouldn't be their first Final Four appearance, but if Princeton made the Final Four this year, I don't think people are going to be. It's going to be a much larger conversation we're going to be having if the Tigers are able to do that. But the other 4 teams in this region here, you got Alabama, who has never been. Obviously, they are the favorite out of this group right now, but still
highly the favorite.
Yes, San Diego State, which would really rewrite some of the conversations that not only we but many others have had about the Mountain West if they were able to make a run there. And then Creighton, the Blue Jays, represent the Big East. We're going to talk more about the Big East later in the show, but they're a team that hasn't been to the Final Four either. So one of those 4 teams is going to the Final Four, and it's probably going to be a team that has never been there before. So that's the fun. That's the fun of this. Like they're obviously Gonzaga, UCLA, UConn, those are teams that have all done it before. Those are the teams that they're probably going to come out there on the West region. Midwest, you got Texas and Miami, more traditional teams that you kind of expect to see in that conversation. Obviously Houston out there as well. But yeah, I'm excited about the South region. It's Alabama's the favorite. I know that not that fact is maybe not going to be something that people are going to be super excited about because they're the number 1 overall seed and it was kind of expected that they're getting here. But still, if they make it, that's a nice story for them. It's a nice story for the program. And we're going to have a nice story for somebody's program, regardless, coming out of the South region.
And speaking of some of that conference talk you just mentioned, it's also always fun to look at the conference affiliations because we have all this conversation all season long about which conference is the strongest and blah, blah, blah. Keep in mind, folks, so much of it is matchup based. So don't take what I'm about to say as like, oh, this is the best conference and this isn't the worst. Some of it's just based on who you play and who's in front of you. But going into the Sweet 16, we have 2 conferences tied with the most teams left. That's the Big East and the SEC, who both have 3. We'll talk about all 3 of those Big East teams here in a second. The Big 12, which has 2. We just talked at length about Kansas State, and then obviously Texas is left as well. And then there's a whole host of conferences with 1 team each, and that's the AAC, that's Houston, ACC, that's Miami, we just talked about, Big Ten, we joked about that yesterday,
baby.
Of course, Michigan State, January, February, Izzo. CUSA has 1 team left, Florida Atlantic. The Ivy, Andy just talked about Princeton. Mountain West has 1 left at San Diego State. Pac-12 has 1 left, UCLA, and the WCC, Gonzaga. So a lot of diversity there and pretty cool stuff. You love to see all these different conferences.
No chalk either.
No chalk. Yeah. So none of the conference. Talk more about that, Andy.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, and 5 in the Midwest. So pretty close there. Shout out to Miami for disrupting that with their win over Indiana, the West. Would have gotten there. And it's funny, I think I read somewhere that the West region was the one that was most projected to be chalk, and myself included. I'll be honest, on my bracket, I had the West being extremely chalk. And it would have, if it weren't for the shirtless wonder, Eric Musselman and Hogs upsetting Kansas, arguably one of the biggest, certainly, one of the biggest upsets. I think obviously the seed numbers are not as rangy as like Princeton over Arizona or whatever, but anytime a 1 seed gets upset in the second round, you're going to be talking about that. And for Kansas to go down and kind of disrupt that when Gonzaga still advanced to the Sweet 16, UCLA is the 2 seed, they still advanced. UConn didn't have that much trouble with St. Mary's, they advanced. So now you're talking about 2, 3, 4, but not quite because of Arkansas.
So really interesting stuff. We rarely ever get all those 1 seeds advancing, and certainly not all the top 16 seeds. Andy, 4 Big East teams were in action on Sunday, making up exactly half of the games. How'd they do? Quite well, thank you very much. We're going to unpack it in just a moment. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The tournament is heating up, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook now. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and 3-pointers drained. Make sure to check out all the lines for this weekend's Sweet 16 games. Plus, Andy, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a same game parlay, which gives you a bigger payout. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/locked-on to learn all about it. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay, Andy, we've been saying all year how good the Big East is, how strong it is. And again, while we said this a second ago, the number of teams remaining in a certain tournament doesn't show a conference's strength or weakness necessarily, but it ain't nothing.
Yeah,
right? It's got to mean something for sure. I mean, and so listen, for the Big East, let's not hide the numbers. They had these 4 games on Sunday, won 3 of them, with Marquette being the lone team to lose. Unfortunately, that's my first Final Four team off the board.
Your Big East favorite too, the team that won the tournament. It's kind of shocking that they're the one that's out to a Big Ten team. What do you know?
Come on, shock it. But again, Marquette, similar to Kansas State, one of those teams that kind of came out of nowhere and had a marvelous year compared with expectations. But again, we do get Xavier moving on to the Sweet 16, UConn, and Creighton. And so great stuff. Andy, let's start with Xavier, whom I know I wrote off. I think you did. And I think most of the national college basketball media probably did after they lost their big dude. How have they been able to continue this even without Zach Freemantle?
Yeah, no Freemantle really seemed like it was going to be kind of a death blow for Sean Miller's team, but they have continued to find out. I mean, that Jack Nungy's been fantastic as their low post threat, and they kind of were primarily utilizing both of them. And you'd think, okay, losing one of those guys, the other guy's going to need to step up, and it's not that simple. But that really has been a big part of the recipe for Xavier. Nungy had 18 points on 8 of 12 shooting in this game against Pitt, and Pitt, play-in team, 11 seed, barely made the tournament. You can try to take away from that. But one thing, I know we've talked about this before, like, I don't care who you play if you keep advancing. It does not matter to me, because if you're playing a team that upsets somebody else, they deserve to be there. The fact that Xavier wasn't playing Iowa State in this game doesn't take away anything for me from the fact that they're in the Sweet 16, because they beat the team that beat Iowa State. It just doesn't matter to me. And Pitt in particular has a lot of size, and for Xavier to still win that game without their starting center, Colby Jones was fantastic. Almost had a triple-double here, 10 points, 14 boards, 7 assists for him. I'm still a little out on Xavier long term. I'm not sure that I think. I mean, long term is relative. We're in the Sweet 16. They're not
long term's 2 weekends at this point.
Exactly. But still, I mean, shout out to Sean Miller's team to take this program over and bring them to a Sweet 16 is a really nice accomplishment. One
of the nice things is that Xavier had 6 guys in double figures on Sunday. I mean, and that's how you replace a stud, right?
They only played 7 guys too.
Yeah, exactly. And so all 6 of those in double figures were between 10 and 18. Nobody had more than 18. And so if you can keep that balanced scoring, you're in good shape. Let's talk about the one Big East team that did lose, as we already mentioned, that's Marquette. But I want to live on the Michigan State of it all. Andy, like, big picture, what a story for them to rebound what happened several weeks ago and get Tom Izzo back to the Sweet 16, to the second weekend of the tournament, with, quite honestly, one of their more unheralded teams in recent memory. And I don't think a lot of
people can name players on Michigan State's team. Like, they don't have a Denzel Valentine, or they don't have some of those guys that kind of stand out that you hear about throughout the season. Like, we've talked about Michigan State on the show a few times, but we haven't kind of litigated a whole lot about this team because they weren't super relevant, quite honestly. They were fine, and it was kind of like, oh, Tom Izzo's team, like, and then we talked about them when the unfortunate shooting happened at East Lansing and the kind of response to that from Tom Izzo, and he was very emotional about it. But this is a team that has really elite guard play, and in the game against Marquette and Tyler Kolek, you kind of thought, okay, guard play is going to win out, so Marquette's going to win, and that is not what happened. It was a bad time for Tyler Kolek to have a bad game, but that's what happened. He had 7 points, 5 assists, 6 turnovers. And Michigan State came in with a game plan. They executed it. They got the really nice game from Tyson Walker. He had a big shot down the stretch. And now we're looking at this is Tom Izzo's 3rd time in the Sweet 16 as a 7 seed. That is a remarkable stat. That means crazy. 3 times he has. I would have to look at all 3 of the instances, but I'm guessing in all 3 instances he beat a 2 seed, because it's very unusual for it to be a 15 seed. So he has advanced to the Sweet 16 by pulling off a 5 seed upset 3 times as a 7 seed. Really remarkable stuff. The only other stat I wanted to mention on this game, a stat from Ken Pomeroy that he tweeted a while ago, before the tournament even started, after the seed came out, and he said, teams that get a 1 or a 2 seed when they were unranked in the preseason have a history of not performing well in March. And there's enough data that it seems like it's not coincidental. Now, I don't know necessarily what it means, because all those teams are different, obviously, but he said, hey, this is an indication that Purdue and Marquette might not do all that well in the NCAA tournament.
Andy,
Well,
guess what?
here we are.
That's right.
Yeah. So I don't know that necessarily means all that much, but it was noteworthy to see that tweet 5 days ago and then realize, oh, we're in a situation where neither Purdue or Marquette are advancing to the Sweet 16. But I think still an incredible season from Shaka Smart to pull off what they did in the regular season after being, picked 9th in the regular season. Really, really nice accomplishment. And then I think looking forward for the Big East, like UConn, again, Marquette's the team that lost, but boy, UConn really, really turned on the Jets against St. Mary's. That was a game I was really looking forward to see on Sunday. And it kind of turned into a snooze fest in the second half. And part of that, unfortunately, was an injury for St. Mary's. Alex Dukas kind of grabbed his back and went down. And I haven't seen an update on exactly what it was. It looked to me like it was potentially a back spasm, but he did not return. This was kind of late in the first half. St. Mary's was up early in the game. They were up for most of the first half. And then once UConn kind of made the run in the second half, that was it. For St. Mary's, they struggle with the same thing that everybody struggled with this year, which is how the heck do we stop Adama Sanogo? And
I've got an answer, Andy. You don't.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. Yet. He had an absolute monster game here in this one. UConn outscored the Gales by 14 in the second half, win by 15. Really nice performance from UConn. And right now with they're going to play Arkansas, not a gimme by any stretch of the imagination, but they were expecting to play Kansas, and now they got themselves a different matchup, and it'll be interesting to see if they can advance past that and then play the winner of Gonzaga and UCLA, because quite honestly, I think UConn has a very good chance of being in the Final Four, especially after what they did to St. Mary's.
It would not shock me in any way. I mean, in the Marquette game, you mentioned it was a really bad time for Tyler Kolek to have a bad game. Same is unfortunately true for St. Mary's with Logan Johnson and Aiden Mahaney going to combine, what was it, like 7 of 28? You just had to have, you had to have that from those guys. And unfortunately, they didn't get it. The other Big East team in action, was Creighton against Baylor. And we really looked at talking about like Baylor, basically it's Baylor's backcourt versus Creighton's front court. And but it turned out to be not, because Ryan Nembhard goes nuts for Greg McDermott's team. 30 points on 8 of 13 shooting, a perfect 10 of 10 from the free throw line. Andy. And that's on again. Like Baylor Shireman had a not good game.
Yeah, he struggled.
But here you are. The rest of the starters, all in double digits, led by Nembhard's 30. Great stuff there.
Let me pose this to you, Isaac, real quick before we call it a day. Out of these three teams, you got a 6-seed Creighton, you got a 4-seed UConn, you got a 3-seed Xavier. We kind of litigated Xavier a little bit, but I'm curious, out of those three teams, how many of them are going to the Elite Eight? How many of them are going to the Final Four? Who, if you had to pick a team that might win it all out of the Big East, if the Big East is crowning champion, if they're bringing a trophy home this year, who's it going to be?
I mean, I feel like I'd have to say, like, even outside the context of the tournament, give me UConn. I trust them more than Xavier or Creighton right now. Yeah. And I believe also by path. Like when I do consider it in context, Xavier's got to face Texas and then either Miami or Houston.
Right.
I don't think
Alabama.
and Creighton. Yeah. I mean, Creighton gets Princeton. So I think if it's just Elite Eight, Creighton, because of playing Princeton. But if it's Final Four national champion, give me UConn. What about you?
Yep, UConn as well. Same thing. I think UConn's a good matchup. They have a decent matchup against both Gonzaga or UCLA. Defensively, Gonzaga would struggle to handle Adama Sanogo again. Well, who doesn't? But
or Donovan Clingan for that matter.
Yeah, they would struggle against both of them. And UCLA has really good guard play, obviously, but they're missing a huge piece of their defense in Jalen Clark, and I think that would be enough for UConn to pull off a victory there.
Yeah, especially man. Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's right. I think that's the call.
Isaac, from 68 to 64 to 16, we're down to it in the Sweet 16. I want to thank all of you so much for listening. Whether you're in our first week listening to Locked On College Basketball, whether you were with us back in November when the show started, whatever it may be, we are having an absolute blast. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us wherever you get podcasts. Go hit that subscribe button. Go like us. Go review on iTunes. Leave us comments. Let us know who you think is going to be in the Elite Eight, which Big East teams are going to be there, whatever it may be. We're going to be here all year long too. We're not gone. April 3rd is not the end of the podcast. We are rolling through 5 days a week for the rest of the spring and summer transfer portal, all of the coaching carousel, everything coming up. We're going to be here with y'all. So definitely hit that subscribe button again so you're there for all of the updates. Isaac, I can't wait for the next couple of days until we get back to hoops starting on Thursday for a chance to go to the Elite Eight. For now, though, peace out.